The scariest type of story to tell is one that already exists, and The Last of Us is no different. Like many fans, I was concerned about another video game adaptation, until I came across a podcast with Troy Baker, the original voice for Joel, where he made a profound statement.
What I would tell everyone going in, whether you are a fan of the IP or this is a brand new introduction for you, I would say it's not a comparison. It's a companion. And I feel like we've left adaptation behind, and this is now evolution. The game exists. We've told that story. Clearly it's resonated with people. But what if this?
Straight from the horse's mouth, this is something new, something that pushes the boundaries of adaptation, with clever departures from the game to better fit the world-class television audiences expect from HBO. And those expectations are the seed that will bear Troy's prospective fruit. On today's episode of Curious, I'm asking, how is The Last of Us not an adaptation? Spoiler warning. Expectations matter, whether you're creating something new or repurposing a beloved IP. To understand why, I'll start with media influence. What our brains absorb is what shapes our identity and culture. It's why we all agree this song is sad and this movie is bad. Not because we communicated those thoughts, but because they were communicated to us. From birth, we are told what to say, what to feel, what to think by our environment. That includes the media, which is why concepts like representation and censorship are very important. Media messages are so constant and pervasive that we're continually being exposed to information either directly from the source or by other people talking about it. Therefore, people in charge of the media are responsible for educating the public. Regardless of their intentions, we are still influenced. Long story short, art informs belief. What your art says will impact what people believe. And Hollywood has taught audiences to believe adaptations are awful. Gaming adaptations in particular have such a terrible reputation. They've coined the phrase video game movie curse when describing the constant failure to bring these digital stories to the big screen. Like 2016's Assassin's Creed, starring and produced by Michael Fassbender, who admitted to never having played any of the games. How can you produce something you don't understand? Or Need for Speed, a franchise all about racing cars, aggressively fending off cops, and roaming an open world of souped-up driver culture, somehow translated into a coming-of-age convict revenge story? How is it the original Fast and Furious is a better adaptation for Need for Speed than the one we got? The answer is 100% lack of effort. Filmmakers did not believe video game stories could operate in a film format. The director of the Resident Evil movies even said,
I think it wouldn't have been a great filmmaking experience or film-going experience if we'd had to just slavishly follow one of the games.
So instead of following the games, these movies abandon nearly every aspect of them. No creative substitutions, just half-baked attempts at showing iconic elements. Naturally, audience expectations shrank with each cinematic attempt, until about 5 years ago, where a miracle mixture of movies and series came together to finally lift the video game curse. Detective Pikachu, Sonic's 1 and 2, Castlevania, Arcane, so many respectful interpretations of the source material. And The Last of Us is no different in terms of staying faithful to its origin. It just stands out by recontextualizing a lot.
It was only when I talked to Craig that I became extremely excited of what this adaptation might look like.
To adapt means to modify, Therefore, departures from the source material are expected. Thankfully, writer-producer Craig Mazin played the game and loves it, so his departures serve a story logic. HBO Ellie is more violent and swears a ton.
Let me out or you're gonna pay, motherfuckers! Asshole! Holy shit, I'm actually outside.
Because she endured bullying and abandonment. Tess isn't just Joel's partner.
What about your guy? Because when he shoots you, I mean, put yourself in my shoes.
Like, he answers to me. So I give you my word that he won't hurt you.
She's in charge of them both because Joel runs on autopilot. He's staying emotionless out of fear of experiencing loss again. As for Frank, he's a footnote in the game, but here he's explored for an entire hour. That's just one example where the show adds something to create a better story than the game. His whole episode juxtaposes the uglier side of post-apocalyptic life by highlighting precisely what everyone's fighting for: some level of peace or stability. Bill and Frank's arc shares the same intimacy and tragedy as any other pair of survivors in this fragile world. Like Troy Baker said, not a comparison, a companion. In this genre, it's common practice to repurpose existing elements, but rarely are changes made to successfully detour from the game without sacrificing major plot points. In my Andor video essay, I mentioned a similar recontextualization. I'll link that below the like button. Both shows recognize their canon without being handcuffed to it. What's equally impressive is how they communicate this within the context of their worlds. For Last of Us, major differences like how the fungal infection began tells us longtime fans to trust this new direction by expanding what we already know. I call that a show of faith, which runs parallel with video game co-director Neil Druckmann coming on as producer. His involvement gains the goodwill of gamers as they expect him to shepherd the retelling of iconic events. That's where adaptations usually fail. Both video games and movies suffer from a plague of retreading stories in the form of remasters and remakes. On the Friends Per Second podcast, Gerard Khalil summed up the difference pretty well.
I feel like remaster is making improvements to what came before, being mostly stoked about what was present, and just making quality of life changes without fundamentally changing the product. Whereas a remake, at this point, as defined by Final Fantasy and Square Enix, is taking a story that everyone already knows and keeping the story, the characters, the beats, and the moments relatively the same, but then taking everything else that was there at the base, throwing it away, and bringing new foundations to rebuild it back up to hopefully tell new stories or more improved stories, some would argue.
Basically, it's returning to familiar ground versus revising from the ground up. So what happens when artists do revise?
I love that so often when we were working on this, when we had a deviation, Craig would always call me. He's like, okay, I've been thinking about Sam, and hear me out. I know it's a big change, but what if he were death?
Given the opportunity to reimagine with fresh ideas, how far could you go in a different direction without betraying the original concept? That's the boundary being pushed here.
My philosophy on this show has always been, when should we deviate and when should we come back? If it's kind of the same or worse, we stay where the game is. If it's better, we deviate.
To label this a rehashed story is just plain false. Dig beneath the shot-for-shot recreations and you'll find deeper layers to characters that were not accessed in the game. I'm not saying HBO and Sony are competing over who told the story better. What I'm saying is, making this a series instead of a film was the right call. They understood the importance of format.
For a show that has monsters in it, we don't have a lot of monsters because there's no gameplay when you're watching a show.
Format is the canvas art lives on and the medium it's presented in. Consider how picture frames don't work for a sculpture the way a glass box does. One limits the perspective and the other unlocks it, like how a film offers less exploration than a TV show. Equally important is what form best suits the story. Arcane doesn't make sense to be live action, although the cosplayers do a great job. Last of Us should not be an animated series when you can watch all the cutscenes in movie form already. Super Mario Bros. Shouldn't be live action, but Sonic the Hedgehog? Well, it's a hybrid. My point is the choice between live action and animated is not so black and white. On the financial side, Arcane took 6 years to fully produce. Last of Us only took 2. Arcane's first season allegedly cost $85 million. The rumored budget for Last of Us Season 1 is $100 million. Then there's the creative side, where a vision needs to be consistent across all formats. Arcane's unique animation first came from fan-favorite music videos executed in Fortish's painterly style. It's proven to engage artists and audiences, so there's no reason to disrupt those foundations. Arcane built upon that aesthetic to keep its universes connected. It did what The Last of Us has done. Move past adaptation and embrace evolution. The showrunners have admitted plot updates like fleshing out the Jackson settlement were always meant to be in the video game. They just didn't have the resources or time to implement those ideas back then. Remaking the game into live action allows Neil Druckmann to achieve something closer to the original vision. To further distance this from adaptation, consider how performers from the game were brought back to collaborate on the show. Jeffrey Pierce plays a mercenary, as opposed to his video game role of Joel's brother Tommy. The original Joel and Ellie, Troy Baker and Ashley Johnson, played different characters, one of whom was never seen in the game. Ashley playing Ellie's mother is such a poetic evolution. Who could care more for Ellie than the actress who played her a decade ago, who grew up with her and passed her? It's the same reason Merle Dandridge wanted to return.
I first met Marlene almost exactly 10 years ago in 2012. It was to audition for the video game. As far as the HBO series, I don't remember when I first heard about it, but did I think that they would actually cast me? No, I didn't. The hundreds of people that work on the game make you look like Marlene. It's another thing to step in front of the camera and embody her with my own instrument. And I had a couple of things on my side, which was I grew into her, I aged into her a little bit, and I guess my deep passion and love for her.
To me, all these decisions elevate the series beyond traditional definitions of adaptation. Again, going back to Troy's quote,
The game exists, we've told that story, clearly it's resonated with people. But what if this?
Well, this project has shattered expectations. Success from similar IP like Arcane indicates a demand for equally passionate interpretations, which is why I believe a seismic shift in the industry is coming. The death of adaptations. It's no coincidence most of my examples from earlier were produced by streaming services. Those platforms continue to be disruptors in the film industry. Creative freedom and riskier projects attract Hollywood elites like bears to honey. For Netflix, that gamble has paid off. They currently hold more critically acclaimed game adaptations than any competitor, with 12 more coming soon. And their portfolio describes how adaptations will die. If studios change the execution of adapting, they change expectations as well. The standards for storytelling keep rising while viewer tolerance keeps lowering. The first nail in this coffin came from Disney when they reported a first-time subscriber loss of 2 million users. That drop followed the awful response to adapted series like Kenobi and She-Hulk. Fans felt cheated and newcomers felt bored. It's not a great combination when paired with Disney's billions in loss causing them to replace their CEO. The second sign of doom comes from Sony themselves. A cliche-riddled Uncharted movie barely scraped up box office returns for a franchise whose video games collectively sold $1 billion in revenue. Compare that to HBO's Last of Us, which had an average of 15 million viewers per episode at $16 per subscriber. Clearly, series are more successful than movies. Or movies need to take notes on what series are doing to achieve the same level of appeal. One area worth studying is fans themselves. Odds are you've seen 1 or 2 fan-made short films, and I bet they were surprisingly good. Pioneers of this movement include YouTube legends Freddie W. and Corridor Digital. They perfectly translated video games into live action with a focus on expanding the lore. As long as studios keep missing that mark, adaptations as we know them will cease to exist. Change is inevitable. Either you grow with it or get left behind. That's why this TV show will be remembered as the first of its kind, not the last.